welcome to Real Talk on Racism. My name is Renai Ellison. Have you ever heard the phrase culturally responsive teaching? I'd never heard it before until I saw a post of my very good friend, Dr. Darlyne de Haan, on Facebook, and I had to get a little bit more information. So I want to introduce you to this incredible woman who spends a great deal of her time with this specific type of teaching. Welcome to Real Talk on Racism, Dr. de Haan.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
May I call you Darlyne for the purposes of this interview?
Please do, yes.
It's so good to see you.
Same here.
Yeah, tell me about this culturally responsive teaching and what it's all about.
Well, culturally responsive teaching is how to teach in a classroom when there are multiple cultures in the classroom. And this is what classrooms are now becoming. It's not this, one culture, one type of teaching anymore. And ELs, English learners, are becoming the minority majority. And they say in about 2025 that that they will become the majority. So ELs are really in every classroom, in every corner of this country. And teachers need to be able to teach this population so that they can be academically successful. And one of the ways is through culturally responsive teaching.
So if I am a teacher in a classroom, what makes culturally responsive teaching different than just regular teaching?
Okay, great question.
Yeah.
So what it is a lot of people think it's a race thing. So when they hear about culturally responsive teaching, they think that it's a black-white issue, and it's not. It's a cultural issue. So there's always culture being taught in the schools, but the question is whose culture is being taught in the schools? And the majority of the time, it is the teacher's culture. And what we have to understand that 70%, at least 70% of teachers are white middle-class females. And that is how teaching is being taught. But we have students in the classroom who might have, come from many different cultures. They could be coming from Sudan. They could be coming right from the U.S. because 60% of ELs are U.S. born, and people don't know that, right? So if I'm from, say, Peru, I'm going to have a certain culture. If I'm from Mexico, I'm going to have another culture. Even within the African American race, right? That is going to be a culture. The Latinos are going to have a culture. The Indians are going to have a culture. And when I say that, I mean small things like eye contact. Some cultures, kids look down as a sign of respect, or the parents look down. There can be some cultures that invade your personal space. Those are cultures. And so they need to understand these cultures so that they can do the best for the student before you give assignments, when you interact with their parents, by understanding the cultures. So culturally responsive teaching isn't a black-white issue. It's understanding the cultures and building it into your lesson design.
So the teacher really has to do his or her homework.
Yes.
In order to be able to have that culturally responsive approach to teaching.
They have to.
How does someone prepare to be a culturally responsive teacher?
Well, it is through workshops, but culturally responsive teaching is not a one and done. It's long term. And it's also very challenging because in order to be the best culturally responsive teacher, you have to do self-reflection. Okay, you have to address your implicit biases. You have to admit that that implicit biases exist and that you hold them. We all hold them. You have them, I have them, everyone has them. But it's such a norm of our environment, we don't know we have them, right? So you have to really look at yourself within and how you react to things to find out where those biases are. Prime example, a student's on line in school to get the pencil sharpened. The teacher goes to the student and says, say it's me, Darlyne, would you like to have a seat? The student says, no. The teacher most likely will get upset to the principal's office. Kid goes to the principal's office, I don't know why I'm here. She asked me if I wanted to sit down. I didn't want to sit down because I was waiting to get my pencil. The thing is, in her culture, the question is understood to be a statement. In the student's culture, he comes from a culture where it's explicit. Sit down. So he's answering according to his culture. Adult asked me a question, I answered. but they see it differently.
That's interesting.
Culturally responsive teaching.
Wow. So I think what I'm hearing is that there needs to be a level of sensitivity.
Yes. Yes.
In order to be able to really come outside of your own comfort zone.
Yes.
And relate to the student.
That's exactly what it is.
Wow.
But you have to be, you don't know you're doing it. So if we when we talk about culturally responsive teaching, we also talk about microaggressions, right? So there's different types of microaggressions. Person might say something not knowing it's culturally offensive, right? Because there are 3 types of microaggressions. So microassault is flat out racist statement, right? Then you have microinvalidation, where somebody might say something like, oh, you don't act like you're black. You don't speak like you're black. Oh, you have these high achievements. I didn't think that X type of person would have that. Then we have another microaggression, which is the most damning, and that's the one when we say things that we might not realize that it is offensive, like, wow, you're really pretty for a black girl. Or, oh, you have all those tattoos. I didn't think that you would be a good student. So and that's called micro insult. So those are things that somebody might be saying it as a compliment, but it's not. And being culturally responsive, you learn to identify them, and so you catch them before you say them.
Yeah.
Yes.
So as you've been doing this work,
yes,
you said that it starts with self-reflection.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you learned about yourself?
Oh, gosh. I catch myself a lot. Yeah. In a lot of things that we might say or think, because you get it from your environment, right? So, for instance, when I grew up and my mother had certain rules, those are the rules that I think are what's there. So, for instance, and I'm going to be put myself out there, right? So, my mother, we grew up without a lot, okay? And my mother struggled, worked very, very hard, 3 girls, but we all made it, all professional. So my mother would have this thing about, I'm never going to go on food stamps. We're not going to go on food stamps. If we're hungry, we're going to be hungry together. We're not going on food stamps. So you grow up with that thing like food stamps aren't good, right? So it becomes it's an implicit bias. So I remember one time I was online at the supermarket putting the stuff up on the conveyor belt, and everything, and a woman in front of me paid with food stamps. Immediately got my attention. So I had my perception from growing up what this person, what it would signify based on things my mother told me. Now, mind you, I want to tell you, we did end up going on food stamps. So I just want to put that out there. We did go on food stamps. But that was my implicit bias. I had to catch myself. Like, wow, Darlyne, I can't believe you're like thinking those thoughts, clean your thoughts out.
Right.
But you really start learning to identify where, before you say something, you have to say to yourself, okay.
Catch yourself.
Yes. Is that a bias? And that's what has to happen, and that's the training that has to occur, that before you open your mouth, you have to think, okay, what I'm about to say, is that going to be misconstrued? Is that a bias that I have? Is it going to be offensive? And it does take practice.
And what's interesting is that you're a woman of color.
Yes.
And you're going through this.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the work that's involved in becoming a culturally responsive teacher, educator, it's deep-seated.
Yes. Yes.
It's no joke.
No, it's fair, and it's so needed, because it makes a difference between kids being academically successful and not. So if that classroom environment is not a safe place, meaning that the kids know that they're welcome there. So teachers need to look at their classrooms. Are your word walls in only one language, knowing that you have 3 or 4 languages spoken in your class? Are the pictures on the wall linguistically and culturally diverse, so the kids feel welcome?
Explain to us what that means. I think I know, but explain to us what that means.
Okay, so linguistically diverse means it's more than just English spoken.
Right.
Right? So there's a lot of different languages spoken. How is the teacher dealing with that? Culturally diverse means it's more than just one type of culture within that classroom. So when you have these linguistically and diverse classrooms, I should be able to walk into your classroom and see the world. I should see all races. I should see all cultures. When I see books, I should see books with different races of kids, different cultures of kids on the books.
Now, that brings up another question for me, Darlyne. What about the teachers in the white suburbs?
Well, that's where that's, like I said, 70% of the population, no matter where you are white middle-class females.
Right.
So there is that disconnect, that cultural disconnect,
Okay.
which is why it's really needed to have this training.
So it's even more important to have
Yes.
it. Maybe not more, but it's just as important to have it in those populations
Definitely.
as it is in the inner city or in diverse school systems.
No, even in diversity, because there's cultures within a race, right?
Right.
So there's cultures within a different, race. There's cultures within a culture of a culture.
Right.
So, like for instance, if you take the race of Asians, right?
Right.
And then you have the ethnicity of Chinese. Well, there's subcategories of Chinese. There's Hung Chinese, Hmong Chinese. There's like 56, I believe, ethnicities within Chinese, and each of those have a culture.
Right.
So even if you are in an ethnically and linguistically diverse community, even if you are a person of color and your class might be all African Americans or blacks, I should say, there are cultures within that. So every single person needs to have culturally responsive teaching.
What does it do for the child? Because you talked about it really being an asset to a child's education to be able to experience this cultural diversity and that it's a positive thing for their education. Can you share with us what some of the benefits might be?
Okay, I think to really answer that question, we have to understand the brain. So I'm going to nerd out for a minute, okay?
Yeah. She loves the brain.
Yes, I do. So that's okay. So I have to nerd out for a second. So our brain right now is a primitive brain, right? It's the same brain and functions that we had from the cavemen. And the brain looks for two things, safety and pleasure. Those are the only two things the brain really wants. It wants to keep you safe and it wants to keep you happy. So there are three structures. Well, actually two, but there's the amygdala, but there's two of them. So amygdala on both sides of the brainstem. And then you have reticular activating system, right? So what they do is they sense at all times what's going on in the environment. That's the purpose of the RAS, reticular activating system. It's your alert system. And think about it if you were an animal. So if you were an animal, you want your reticular activating system to work because it has to look for things that are different. Because it could be a lion hiding in the brush, could be, you're a prey. So it has to be able to automatically sense your environment and see if the environment is safe. Same thing in the classroom. So when a kid is in the classroom, it needs to know it's a safe environment. Okay? If it notices it's not a safe environment, either by the body language of the teacher, how the teacher approaches them, even from student to student, if they're noticing that nothing in the room looks like them, it's going to be an alert for the brain. The reticular activating system is going to say something's not right. When there's these microaggressions that are stated or done, like we just spoke about, it's going to put the reticular activating system, the RAS, I'm going to call it, on alert, right? If the alert is great enough, it's going to signal the amygdala, who decides if anything goes to the prefrontal cortex, or thinking brain, or if it goes to the lower part of the brain, fight, flight, or freeze. So it sends a signal to the amygdala saying, something's happening.
Is that the amygdala hijack?
Yes, that's very good. Very good. I'm going to convert you yet. So the amygdala hijack. So if it is a high enough stress, the amygdala is going to stop all communication to the prefrontal cortex. It's going to go to the lower brain. We're totally involuntary now. You have no control whatsoever, and that's fight, flight, or freeze. But in the classroom, it looks differently. The classroom is going to be daydreaming, nodding off, picking on another kid, because they're not going to run. When their freeze is going to be like that stare, like that glassy-eyed stare, right? Or, stuff like that. That is what happens. So when that kid is safe, that won't happen.
Wow.
So that's why the environment of that class is so utterly important, and that student needs to feel welcome in there. And for teachers to do that, that micro insult by saying something like, oh, Darlyne, or Renee, I met your parents. They speak English very well. That's an insult. Like, the kid might not know why it's not right, but they know it's not right. The good touch, bad touch, right?
Yeah.
They just know it's not right. So, and then they start feeling like, I'm not welcome here. And when they feel not welcome, the brain isn't fully operational, and then we're going to have this achievement gap that's just going to get wider and wider. If that teacher doesn't believe, because of their implicit bias, that that student can be just as successful in the rigorous course and just gives them the easy work and sees the other kids getting the harder work, that's an alert for the brain that something's not right.
Wow.
This environment isn't safe. I'm not welcomed here.
Wow.
And when they're not welcome, they cannot learn.
Right.
But they don't have control over that when you get that amygdala hijack.
Wow. This is deep stuff. Thank you so much, Darlyne. We're going to be right back with more with Dr. Darlyne de Haan in just a moment. We'll be right back. We are back here at Real Talk on Racism with Dr. Darlyne de Haan, and we are talking about the brain.
Yes, we are.
Fight, flight, or freeze, and all these awesome concepts that we have to learn that will help us not just learn about the brain, but learn about how the brain reacts in times of stress.
Yes.
And how this culturally responsive teaching can really help a student to be less stressed and less and more motivated.
Yes.
As a result, right?
Yes.
So you were talking about the amygdala hijack.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about why it's important for students maybe to be aware that this is something that goes on in the brain when they're learning?
Oh, definitely, definitely. When a kid understands the functions of the brain, they can start to control their emotions, and they can catch themselves. They'll know where their triggers are, right? So they'll be able to catch themselves before they get to that place. And it's also just important for the teacher to understand their triggers, so that they can catch themselves before they react to a student's action. So I believe every student, every school, no matter where you are, should have training in the brain, in understanding the brain. Then the student, that's when you talk about mindfulness, right? You talk about having mindfulness activities and meditation and yoga and breathing. All of those things are done because what they do is, once the brain is hijacked, when you have this amygdala hijack, the only way you can release it is by mindfulness or meditation or something. In school, we call them brain breaks. I'm a huge brain break person.
Tell me about that.
And so brain break is just something where you have to unhook it. You have to let the amygdala release it, right? If you stay in that, let's say you're doing math, right? And maybe the kid's anxious over math and is anxious over what's happening. You have to just stop. I used to have the kids stop. When I get that, if I would see that glassy-eyed look, or, you would sense that something's not right within the classroom, that you're losing them for whatever reason, because it happens to the best of us, I would say, okay, kids, stop. Get up. I would have a joke jar. Sometimes we would just say a joke. I would have them do touch the toes, something calisthenic-wise. I would say, okay, for 30 seconds, talk to the person next to you if you want. I would say, okay, everyone, we're going to do a musical chair. Okay, everyone, we're going without, knocking anyone down or anything. But,
right.
I would say, okay, we're going to switch seats. And I would just play music, and they would walk. When the music stopped, that was their new seat. So, but you just have to release the brain, because while you're in hijack, there is no learning. It can't happen.
I can honestly say that I probably spent the majority of my K through 12 years in hijack.
Probably.
And because of stress and tension and things that were going on in my life.
Right.
And if I had a teacher like you, I'd probably be the Surgeon General by now, or President of the United States. I had such a challenge with math and science because it required so much concentration for me. So, Darlyne, you talk about the brain, and you do these awesome videos. You make math and science so much fun for kids.
Thank you.
I watch your videos. I'm 54 years old, and it makes me emotional. Like, I'm getting emotional right now because I think about the times when I was in school and I just couldn't connect.
Right.
I knew I was smart.
Right.
English and all those subjects came really well for me.
Okay.
But the math and the science was always a challenge. And I look at your videos and I think, oh gosh, if only
Right.
I had had a teacher like that. So tell me what inspired you to start doing these videos. Because they are so good.
Thanks. I think it's just my passion for the sciences, but it's also my concern for the lack of minorities and females, low-income students like I was when I grew up.
STEAM, right?
Yes, to be involved in the sciences. And when you get to a certain level, you don't see many minorities or females in math. Like you don't find a lot of females in pre-calc or calculus. You don't find a lot of minorities once they get past Algebra 1. Algebra 1 is the gateway. Our kids have to pass Algebra 1, right? So that is a
To
crucial...
me, that was the ending point. That's where I stopped. Algebra 1 was it.
But for so many kids, right? Like that's the thing. And if we can't get through Algebra 1, we can't do anything. And so we have to find how do we make it engaging, like we make it real life, connected to something. Give them problem-based learning. Don't give them a worksheet and say, okay, solve for X. Okay, two-step equation. Oh my gosh, that's so boring. So one of the things that I wanted to do was for kids to be able to see the science around us. No fancy equipment, no expensive equipment. Schools hear that. You don't need all this fancy stuff. Just everyday material so that they can make this connection between science and their world. You can do a tremendous amount of science from under your kitchen sink, from the local supermarket, from a hardware store, anywhere you can create the science. And so I wanted to do the videos in a way that I was making this connection, not only to that, but to literacy. So I'm a firm believer in using children's literacy to teach math and science. I used to teach at the high school level, middle school and high school level, I taught at. I would teach things using, like Archimedes' principle, using a children's book, right? Simple. Kids love to be read to. We would read the book, you know, draw what was there, ask these questions, and then have them make this connection. It takes away that intimidation factor of what you're dealing with because you're doing it with a kid's book. So, I mean, we don't have to have the textbooks. You can do everything from a children's book. You can do everything just from things you have around. But we have this mentality that we have to have a textbook, we have to have worksheets, we have to have this recipe, what I call recipe science labs, and we don't. We need to use STEM and STEAM and for the kids to use their world as their science lab,
But you know what, Darlyne? I'm going to say something that I think is really true about you. You're unique in that you care so much about those kids.
To a fault. Yes. Yeah.
Where does that come from? Where did you find that desire, that passion, that love, let's just put it there, for children, so much so that you're able to be so creative and so dynamic and innovative with your teaching style that you're really genuinely making connections with these Black and brown children and changing their lives? Where did that all start?
I'm not really sure. I think it's a lot to do with my mom, because my mother was always outside of the box. For instance, when I was learning to count, my mother used to tell me I used to love money. So when I was like 3rd or 4th grade and you're learning multiplication tables or whatever, she would use everything with money. She goes, okay, you like money? We're going to do everything with money. I learned my tables with money. I learned to add and subtract through money. That's culturally responsive teaching, right? You use what that kid likes.
Yeah.
You know your learner. You use that resource.
Nice.
You know, but I think the biggest thing came from when I moved from, I used to be in one part of Bergen County, I moved to another part of Bergen County where I was the only Black kid, K to 12. And I went through a lot of issues then. And so when I got to college, I noticed there weren't many minorities. I'm a chem major, chemistry, biochem, math. I was triple major, right? So there weren't that many minorities. And I was like, why aren't there that many minorities in the sciences? And that started the process. I started a nonprofit organization. When I said, you know what? When I get out of college, I'm going to start a nonprofit organization and I'm going to make a difference in the life of the kids in science. And so I did, Mad About Science Incorporated. That's my nonprofit. So that just started the process. I'm like, how can I get more kids like me, you know, low income, Black, female, to want to love the sciences. And then I used what worked for me. And what my mom used to work for me, from telling stories, like I said, to using money or whatever to engage me. So I just took that to the next level, and that's what I do. I let the kids see science through the eyes and through the lens of, you don't have to have that expensive equipment. You don't have to have any of that. You just need to have that passion. And one thing,
the heart.
And the heart. And another thing too is, I had to work really hard for it. It didn't come like super easy, right? Math was easy. The science was a different story, right? So because I had to work so hard, I found ways to make it stick. And so I'm like, oh, this really worked. And that's a part of what I do with the science videos and how I teach the science. It's like what worked for me. And I also say that because I want to say to all the kids and the parents out there, having an A doesn't mean you're the best for it. You can have a C and still have that passion for it. So don't let that C or B discourage the kids from thinking that they can be good in science. Wow. Because it has nothing to do with it. I had a rough time through my sciences, but I persevered because I really, I loved it, but I just couldn't take that written test all the time. So I had a teacher who let you do practicals. Right? Now while I'm doing it, I can talk and tell you everything that's going on. I knew it. I just couldn't necessarily pick that word for that test question. So we had a lot of practical tests besides written tests, and then I learned how to take a written test because it is an art.
If someone wants to kind of check out your videos, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, very easy. So there's two websites. So there's my brain-based website, which is everything about the brain and ELs and instructional strategies, and that's brainbasedscience.com. And then my science videos, which I've aired on quite a few stations during COVID, is neighborhood-science.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time with Real Talk on Racism.